Cool. So my name's Kyle Galbraith. I'm a senior software engineer based out of here in Portland. I also recently put a course together that focuses on learning Amazon Web Services by actually using it. And in the course, we dive into how to host, secure, and deliver static websites on AWS, which is very pertinent to tonight's talk, right, with Gatsby.js. So what I'm going to run through today is really quickly how you can get a Gatsby blog up and running using a starter project that I created that comes pre-configured with Tailwind CSS, which is a utility-first CSS framework. It's super handy for kind of the back-end engineers like me that might not have the design chops of other people. And then we'll quickly explore some of the social sharing and SEO components that are rolled into it. And then I'll demonstrate how you can get it deployed to AWS. And if we have time afterwards, I'll also walk through how you can set up your AWS infrastructure. So, everybody see that okay? So, first thing is you need to get the Gatsby CLI installed. So, as Kyle already talked about, there's fantastic documentation on how you get up and going with Gatsby.js. I'm certainly not an expert like the mainstream contributors here, but it was super easy for me to use and launch a blog in pretty much less than 4 hours. So we'll go ahead and get that installed. And then we can run Gatsby new, and we'll just call this like temp blog. And we're just going to grab this GitHub URL. So we can create Gatsby blogs, Gatsby sites off of starter projects on GitHub. So go ahead and run that. This can take a little bit. So it's going to pull down the dependencies. It's going to package everything up, link it up for us. So because it can take a little bit, I already have one pulled down. So if we go into Meetup blog, we can see there's all of our files for the starter project. We can run Gatsby develop. This will start a hot reloading server on our localhost 8000 so that we can start seeing the changes. So this is loading the plugins, doing the GraphQL queries. Now if we go back to the browser, we can go to localhost 8000, and we see kind of our boilerplate blog here. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to cancel this one. And we'll go into Meetup blog. Let's just open this up in Visual Studio Code really quick. So you see the source directory. We'll talk about the pages in a second. But the interesting bits, so this is using Gatsby v2. It's using the next version. Recently ported over. So that's good. We also see the dev dependency on Tailwind CSS. We have the build CSS script that's running Tailwind build and outputting our custom CSS. So if we go into components, we see there's a header component, and we see it's essentially loading everything in from a config file to author name and site description. So if we go to that config file, we can change this. Change this to Gatsby Meetup, change site description. Do we have pizza? We do have pizza. Pizza and beer. So there's the hot reloading server in action. Now let's change like this footer color. So if we go to the footer component, so right now the outer div has a class of BG Gray Lightus. This is a built-in utility class to Tailwind CSS. There's a ton of colors built into the framework. So I'm just going to change it to BG Orange, and bada bing, bada boom. So you can also define your own custom CSS. with Tailwind. So if we go down here, we have that background gradient running, and I'm just gonna change this to like black. And then we'll just have to restart our reloading server. And I'm going to run a script that's develop. This is just doing the Tailwind building as well as starting Gatsby develop. How many people have heard of Tailwind CSS? It's a really cool project. It's created by Adam Wathan. I'm a fan. I'm also not a mainstream kind of design type of person, so it's really handy for me. And now if we go back here, can reload it, we have a black background. So we also have this sample blog post here. It has a title, has a date, right? We kind of see this URL at the top. That's year, month, day, and then a slug. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code, we can actually see how that works. So here's 2018-08-01, and then I'm writing all my blog posts in Markdown so that I can easily port them over to some other things. And so we have our front matter up here at the top, and then we kind of have our content down below. So let's just change the title of this. And we see that automatically changed. I didn't do the split view thing like Kyle, but it is very fast. So kind of how that's happening, like Kyle talked about, there's plugins for pretty much all kinds of sources. So I'm using the source file system, and it's essentially just sucking the files out of that pages directory, feeding them into transformer to remark to then convert my markdown into HTML. Other things worth noting kind of in the starter project. So there's this social sharing component already built in. This is just using React Share behind the scenes. There's also an SEO component that's included in the blog posts that is just kind of doing your basic SEO stuff, and then setting up kind of your Facebook graph tags, your Twitter card summary, and all of that. So now we can go back to the command line. And if we run Gatsby build, this will create a production build for us and output it to my public directory. So now if we go into public, we see here's all of my static assets. So then what we can do is I have the AWS CLI installed, and so I can just do Aws S3 Copy. I'm going to copy this in all these files to a bucket that I have called Gatsby, and then my domain. And I'm going to do recursive. And I also have multiple AWS accounts running on my machine, so I'll specify a profile. So this is going to take all the contents of that public directory, put them in my S3 bucket. My S3 bucket's configured for static website hosting. I also have CloudFront sitting in front of it. So now if we go back here, go to gatsby.galbraith.com. There we see the site deployed. So to do that in AWS, I've included in this starter project the deployment pieces you need. So if AWS is fairly new to you and you're a little unsure, like feel free to grab me at the end of this, and I'm happy to help answer questions. So this is using a Terraform template that I created that's essentially just creating an S3 bucket that's configured for static website hosting, and then a simple CloudFront distribution, which is an Amazon-powered CDN. And I just have it output a CloudFront distribution domain, and then I can update my DNS records, point my blog at it, and we're off and running. So with that, again, like if you're learning AWS and static websites is your thing, I'm happy to talk about this course. You can also find me on Twitter if you have questions later. It's just at Kyle Galbraith. You just grab my name from the meetup. And I think that does it. Thank you.